Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 488, A Better Path. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with the Worldwide Kindness Campaign. Here, a look at how kindness helps us all, and how wealth concentration, might end up making us more cruel. Later on, it's a better path. Here, I'll look at ways to avoid someone taking advantage of you, and how to improve your life in general. Today's show will feature background footage from Strawberry Gap Trail. Strawberry Gap Trail is located along Highway 74A in Girton, North Carolina. To get there from Asheville, take 74A East. Go past Fairview and over Hickory Nut Gap, crossing into Henderson County. Shortly thereafter, perhaps just a couple hundred yards, there's a pull-off to the right with a parking lot. This is where the trailhead is. I went up to Ferguson Peak, which is a nice overlook of Fairview, and I went a little past that. Then I ran out of time and had to turn around before it got dark. So now, let's continue with the Worldwide Kindness Campaign. And you negotiate with God what the lessons might be, or perhaps how you learn them, when you learn them in your life, how it helps in your life. You and God are doing this together for your spiritual development, and together that's the goal, and you try to figure out with God the best path forward for your spiritual development in all situations, whether you led a lousy life where you were mean and cruel, and now perhaps you'll suffer in the next life, or perhaps you were kinder and more compassionate, and perhaps you'll have less suffering in the next life. And perhaps it's not just the next life, perhaps it's integrated over a series of lives in the future. It's hard to say. I like to think it goes one life to another, that your next life is based on what you did in your past life, and just that. But it might be a little more involved. Perhaps your next life is based upon what you did in all previous lives, and so on and so on. And perhaps, might take many lifetimes for your spiritual development to occur. Or perhaps it's just one life. It's all debatable, And keep in mind, it could all be a simulation. Just a game of some sort, where we're just game pieces. Well, moving along. That's the spiritual side. That's why you gotta do the Worldwide Kindness Campaign, is for your spiritual development on the spiritual side, and on the secular side, to fight wealth concentration. Maybe you can't fight it, but perhaps more specifically acting as a counterweight to all the disillusionment created by wealth concentration. So you have to counter it with kindness. You have to fight it off with kindness. Fight off the disillusionment. because God doesn't want us disillusioned. God wants us happy and kind to each other. And if we could pull this off, well, perhaps things will be better for all of us. So let's look into the kindness side. Now we know why we should do it. Let's look at how to do it. Well, we got to be kind. We got to be nice. But that's just the beginning. What we're really after, well, once we start being kind, perhaps just on the surface, perhaps without even entirely meaning it, because we're dealing with strangers or perhaps someone from a different culture, but we'll be kind, at least right off the top. Then, after that kindness, as we learn more about them, and as perhaps they're kind to us, well, then perhaps we'll have a little bit of empathy as we hear their stories. Perhaps we'll be able to relate to their suffering. And once we have empathy, once we could really relate to their situation, well, perhaps then we could have compassion and we could really help them. We could do something to make things better for them. Kindness, empathy, compassion, all of these could really go a long way to making things better. How? Well, it's easy. Obviously, this kindness, empathy, and compassion is certainly better than being cynical or cruel or mean. This kindness, empathy, and compassion will help with your mental health compared to being more cynical and cruel. But it goes beyond your mental health. It will help perhaps with your overall knowledge of the world as you learn from more people because you're nicer to them. They're willing to share valuable knowledge with you. And perhaps out of your kindness, you could share your valuable knowledge with them. As you share knowledge with each other, well, then comes the next step. Well, maybe things might get a little easier in your life as far as logistics, your day-to-day life, how you do things. Perhaps through your kindness to someone and talking to them a little bit, perhaps through your conversation and you talk about, let's say, where you work, well, they might tell you a better way to get to work. Or perhaps they know a better job for you, one with better working conditions and better pay. Just a little kindness might gain you that valuable information that could lead to a better job, perhaps a better career, all through a kind conversation. Sure. And if we're really good at this, and we really help each other, and we're all kind to each other, the more of us being kinder to each other, the better. All across the world, the Worldwide Kindness Campaign. If we do it well enough, well, then we might be able to reduce some of that disillusionment created by wealth concentration. But then, by understanding each other, understanding our struggles, understanding how difficult it could be for some people even to vote, as we understand our situation better, not just our situation, but the situation of our neighborhood, our community, our state, our nation, our world. As we get a better handle on this, well, maybe if enough people get on board with this Worldwide Kindness Campaign, well, then maybe things will actually change. Government policy might change as we wield our influence as voters, as political activists, and just through our kindness, empathy, and compassion. As we wield our influence, things may improve and get better, not just for us, but for all people. As we wield our influence, sure, and things might change on the government level, and perhaps things will get better for all of us as we continue on with the Worldwide Kindness Campaign. Now it is time for a better path. Here, well, I'll look at how you could avoid someone taking advantage of you and how you could improve your life in general. So, this section kind of has two parts: improving your life in general and avoiding someone taking advantage of you. Well, let's start with that one. How to avoid someone taking advantage of you. This is obviously a huge and complicated section. There's a lot of ways people could take advantage of you, obviously, and only could cover a small portion of them here. But perhaps you'll get a feel for how to deal with the situation and be able to avoid people taking advantage of you. Sure. So, there's many ways this could happen, obviously. Well, I guess this starts with scammers. Well, they're on the internet with phishing emails and fake websites and bad posts, that might lead you to a site where you'll be ripped off, and many other ways. And then there's the scammers you meet in person. Perhaps someone asking for a handout that might not really need one. It's hard to say. Sometimes people do these things. So, and, well, it just goes on and on. People could scam you in all sorts of ways. Sure. But so can your friends take advantage of you. Perhaps under the guise of doing them a favor, helping a friend out. Perhaps a little help leads to a little more help, and then perhaps they're always needing help. Perhaps always needing money, or perhaps needing all your free time, perhaps even both. It could turn into a real nightmare. That's what I'm talking about. How to avoid these nightmares. Well, you have to be strong. You have to stand up for yourself. That's what it basically boils down to. I'll get into a little more detail about that later on. But who else could take advantage of you? Well, sometimes it's your own family. Sure. And this can obviously be abusive. You have to set your own boundaries. In theory, it should be relatively easy to do, hopefully. Let your family members know where you stand. Sometimes this can be difficult. Sometimes even family members can be bullies. Sure. You just have to do your best to let everyone know how you feel. Well, everyone involved, taking advantage of you. Yeah, even your own family could do this. This is indeed kind of sad, but I'm sure it happens fairly routinely. What else happens routinely? Your lover takes advantage of you. Sure. Well, this is a tough one. You have to weigh the situation and see what you think. Is your lover worth it? Do they have so many wonderful qualities they make up for them taking advantage of you? Or they're taking advantage of you way too much, perhaps costing you way too much. And their positive qualities, well, they're just not worth it. You have to weigh these things yourself. Really figure it out. But once again, you have to stand your ground. You have to let your lover know what's going on. Sure, you have to negotiate, perhaps in exchange for them taking advantage of you less, you could help them out in some other way. Who knows? Everything can be worked through. You just gotta talk it out. This applies to your family too. Some people, however, are hard to talk to. They're obstinate, difficult. They won't accept what you say, or they'll try to yell over you as you talk. Perhaps running out of the room with their hands over their ears. And remembering my dad doing this when my mom caught him in an awkward situation. Perhaps caught him being a little hypocritical, or caught him not caring enough. Gee, it's all very tough indeed. We have to get through these tough situations the best we can. We have to stick up for ourselves to avoid people taking advantage of us. We need to keep whatever resources we have, our money, our time, so we could use it to advance our own situation, which we'll get into shortly. So, there's other situations, I guess coworkers. And then, well, even religious situations. Here, with religion, it could get a little complicated. So, the standard ways of people taking advantage of you, of course, is taking your money, or you giving them money, and perhaps more money and more money, and them dominating you, or restricting you somehow, taking too much control over your life. You have to really look at this. Sometimes a domineering lover might do this. You have to negotiate how much freedom you really have. Of course, the more freedom you give to yourself, the more freedom your lover should have on a similar scale. You have to negotiate it through. You can't get everything. It's all give and take. Well, family and lovers might be easier to negotiate with. Sometimes religious situations are a little more tricky. Sure. Well, I guess because they could use a different set of arguments against you. And I guess your family, friends, lovers, and so forth could do the same. They could use arguments to convince you you're wrong, when in fact you might be right. They're basically trying to gaslight you. Let's look at some of these arguments. Well, these argument of compassion. You should be compassionate, therefore you should help me, therefore you should give me $20. Give me $20 now. But then someone else needs compassion, and you have to give them $20. Or perhaps the same person you gave $20 to yesterday needs another $20 today. It could rapidly get out of control, obviously. Particularly if you live in an area, well, where there's a lot of poor people who are in desperate situations. Well, suddenly, almost everyone needs help. And there's only so much you could do. So you have to realize your compassion, well, even though you might think it's infinite and feel it's infinite, but in practical points of view, as far as time, as far as resources and money, well, there's only so much of that to go around, now isn't there? So I guess there are limits sometimes, sure. There's other arguments about destiny. It's your destiny to help me. Sure, people might say that. You're predestined to help me. Well, perhaps you're predestined not to. Perhaps you're predestined to stick up for yourself. Perhaps putting your foot down, that's your destiny. To limit how much you give to people so you can give more to yourself and other people you hold dear. You have to make sure everything's fair. Fair to your family members and friends. Fair to your lover. And fair to yourself. You have to think about it. Talk about it. Make sure there's enough to go around. Time, money, resources, so that everyone in your life is okay. But make sure you're okay first. You always got to take care of yourself first. Because if you're not okay, you won't be okay to help others. As they say on the airplane, put on your oxygen mask first before assisting others. So, moving along. Well, religious people and other people will try to use destiny against you and say you're destined to do this or that. But as I said, perhaps you're not. You could even be cursed. And I mean that in two ways. Yeah, they could yell curse words at you and say nasty things. You're cursed. And whatever expletives I don't want to say here. Or they could say you're cursed in the sense that a curse has been placed upon you by some evil person or being, or perhaps you're even possessed by an evil spirit. Well, gee, that's not a good situation. You have to evaluate this one personally when someone implies that you're possessed by an evil being. Sure. Or that someone has put a curse on you and it's affecting you. Are you being affected? Are you too evil? You have to look at this honestly. You don't always need the person trying to rescue you to help you. Sometimes you can help yourself. Once you realize what's going on, you could correct it and get rid of the curse. And that applies to many situations besides just curses. Once you realize what's going on, a lot of times you could correct your failings without help from others. You just have to know where you went wrong and why and how to correct it. You have to think about these things. These things are very important. Sure. Well,
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, CaseyWaters2@CaseyWaters.com.